The gravel shifted beneath my heels. I smelled cedar oil, old money, and polished power. 2 years ago, they laughed when Callum proposed to a diner girl. Said I'd never sit at their table. Said I'd bring nothing but shame. Now I held the controlling stake in their family's bank, and I came dressed in black for the funeral of their control. The door creaked open. Silence. A hush of judgment. Then heels clicked from the marble hall. Where in the world are you listening from? Hit subscribe this story. You won't forget it. I met Callum Whitmore during a thunderstorm. He came into the diner-soaked sketchbook clutched to his chest like it held treasure. I poured his coffee, hands trembling from a double shift. He smiled, quiet, kind. The kind of man who saw people before status. Back then, I lived in a trailer behind a mechanic shop. Shared a twin bed with my kid sister Luna. Mama was gone, Dad locked up somewhere in Arizona. Bills came faster than tips, so I worked nights, weekends, every holiday shift. But Callum kept coming back. Always the same booth. Always sketching. One night he left a folded napkin. "You've got an engineer's mind," he'd written. "You break problems apart, then rebuild better." It hit me harder than any tip. I'd been teaching myself financial modeling online, crunching numbers after closing, dreaming of an app that could help people like me. People who got rejected for not having credit cards, who were told just save more when they had nothing to begin with. 6 months later, we were a thing, a real one. The town knew. Luna called him bro in training. Even the cook started giving him free pie. But love doesn't soften marble floors. When Callum took me home for Thanksgiving, the air smelled like eucalyptus and ice. Every surface gleamed. Every person judged. His mother, Cynthia, kissed the air near my cheek. Her nails clicked like time bombs. "I hear you work in food," she said, like it was contagious. I smiled. I always smile, even when it hurts. The dinner table felt like a courtroom. Someone asked about my family. I said my mom passed when I was 16. Said my dad wasn't in the picture. The forks paused midair. A cousin whispered something. Laughter hushed and sharp. Then came the blow. "She's sweet," Cynthia said, "but Callum, darling, she's not long-term." He looked down, didn't speak. I stared at the gravy, thick and glossy like silence. Every muscle in my body begged me to scream. But I swallowed, just like I always did. Later that night in the guest room that smelled like lemon polish, Callum said they'll warm up eventually. I didn't believe him, but I nodded, because I wanted to. I held on to him, onto the fantasy that love could outrun legacy. I was wrong, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The papers were on the kitchen counter, neatly stacked. Cream-colored, legal print glinting under the pendant light. I wasn't snooping. I came in for water. But there it sat, a document labeled Post-Nuptial Trust Agreement. Callum stood at the stove stirring tea like it needed punishment. He looked tired, more than usual. "What's this?" I held the top page. It trembled in my hand. Not from fear, from clarity. He didn't meet my eyes. "My mom's lawyer drafted it," he said. "It's protection." For whom my voice didn't rise. It dropped, like weight snapping from a chain. "They say prenups are normal," he mumbled. "This just separates the Whitmore inheritance. You get everything else." I laughed, dry, like desert wind on bone. Everything else, the insult echoed. "Callum, I don't want your money. I want respect." He flinched. "I know." I told her it felt wrong. "But you didn't say no." Silence. It filled the room like smoke. Cynthia's voice returned, a ghost in my skull. "She's not long-term. She never meant temporary in time. She meant temporary in worth." I folded the papers, sharp, precise, then slid them back. "Tell her I'll stay out of the trust," I said. "But make sure she knows I'm not staying in my place." He reached for me, fingers warm, hesitant. "Naomi," but I was already walking away, through that too-bright kitchen, past portraits of generations on the wall. None of them looked like me. None ever would. Outside, the wind carried a sharpness. Cactus bloom. Iron. I didn't cry. Not then. But something inside me split clean. The gala shimmered with crystal and curated charm. Champagne laughter floated above the crowd. Violin strings curled through the air like silk. I'd borrowed a dress, midnight blue. The zipper stuck, but Luna helped me wriggle in. "You look like a CEO," she said, just one waiting to explode. Cynthia met us at the entrance. Her gown clung like power, gold tight, deliberate. She wore legacy like perfume. "Darling," she beamed at Callum. Then her eyes landed on me. The smile cooled. "This must be your friend from the desert." "Friend from the desert." I nodded. She didn't introduce me by name, didn't say fiancé. Just a friend. Just sand. Inside, I walked beside Callum, but felt 10 feet behind. Eyes brushed over me like lint to be brushed off. Names I'd seen on Forbes lists clinked glasses nearby. No one said hello. They didn't need to. The message was already loud. One woman leaned in, sipped her rosé, and said sweetly, "I love your look. So unpolished. Very real." I smiled. She meant poor. She meant outsider. Callum didn't notice. He was talking to his godfather, laughing. I stood alone by the shrimp tower, watched butter drip down porcelain. Watched Callum from across the ballroom, perfectly at home. A man brushed past, then stopped. Tall, tan suit, expensive. "You're not on the donor list," he said, squinting. "Are you pressé?" I blinked. "No, I'm with of course. +1. He walked away. +1, like an accessory. My throat burned, not from wine, from rage held in place. Later in the car, Callum grinned. "They loved you. Mom said you handled it with such grace." I stared at him. "Grace. She said she was impressed you didn't overreact. That you blended in." Blended in? My nails dug crescents into my palm. Every insult tonight wore pearls and smiled. "She's testing you," Callum said softly, like he believed it. Like abuse was affection in disguise. "She wants to see if you're strong enough." I turned to the window. Outside, the city blurred. A golden blur of glass and lies. I whispered. Then she should pray I never get stronger. The email subject read, "Let's talk about what you're building." No logo, no pitch deck request. Just a time and address, a rooftop bar in Santa Fe. I checked the sender twice. Alias, no clues. Still, I went. I wore black slacks, a pressed shirt, and the boots I bought after my first freelance coding contract. The place shimmered with glass and curated desert chic. Succulents lined the tables. The air smelled like rosemary and money. He sat near the railing, gray temples, linen suit, lemon in his water. "Naomi Rivas," he said, voice smooth, polished. "You came alone, smart. I usually do." A pause, a smile without warmth. Then he gestured to the chair. "Tell me why a waitress thinks she can disrupt banking." The sting landed but didn't draw blood. I'd heard worse, from closer mouths. I sat, looked him in the eye. "I'm not disrupting banking. I'm giving it back to the people it forgot." He laughed once, short, sharp. "I was told you had fire," he sipped. Watched me like a curator eyeing flawed art. "Told by who?" I asked. He raised a brow. "Old friend of your fiancé's family. Cynthia Whitmore speaks often at my firm." There it was, a test. Not of the product of me, of place, of tone. "She told you I'd crack?" I asked. He didn't answer, didn't need to. I pulled out my tablet, opened the app, passed it to him. "This is Sway. It translates real cash flow into actionable financial steps for hourly workers. Low income, no credit, no fluff." He tapped, scrolled, narrowed his eyes. "You're using behavioral nudges. Yes. Based on neuroscience, people save more when encouraged like humans, not judged like failures." Another silence. He didn't nod, but didn't scoff either. I leaned in. "Your firm backs innovators. So here I am without a last name, without a pedigree, offering real-world results." He looked up, really looked. "I could offer you mentorship," he said. "Possibly a small grant." "No," I said it flat, clean. "I came for a term sheet, not a pat on the head." His mouth twitched. He reached inside his coat, slid an envelope across the table. "Pre-seed, $1.5 million. You'll need to prove traction." "I already have," I said, and left before the sun dipped behind the mesas. He proposed in the garden behind the diner, where we first met. Fairy lights, cheap champagne, Callum on one knee in the gravel. The ring didn't sparkle, but his eyes did. "Yes," I whispered, even though my stomach twisted, even though something in me said, "Not yet." He kissed me hard. I told them, he said, "Mom, Dad, they know." I nodded, but I didn't ask how they reacted. I didn't want to ruin the moment. 3 days later, my debit card declined at the grocery store. I laughed, then checked the balance. 1.74. Confused, I opened my finance dashboard. Red flags everywhere. Account under review. Activity flagged. My credit score dropped 90 points overnight. Vendors I'd never heard of opened pending claims. Every bank call ended in hold music and dead air. My inbox filled with cancellations. A nonprofit withdrew from our pilot. A microloan fund reevaluated the risk profile. They didn't say it, but I could read it between the lines. "We Googled you. You're unstable, untrustworthy." Then it hit me. Cynthia. This was her arena, not threats, not drama. Reputation, subtle sabotage. She hadn't just attacked me, she poisoned the financial identity I'd built. I sat on the floor, hands numb, staring at my blocked account like a tombstone. Callum came in. I thought we'd order in to celebrate. He saw my face, saw the laptop. Again, he asked, like this had happened before. This isn't a glitch, I said. It's a message. He crouched beside me, put a hand on my knee. From who? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. His silence confirmed it. He knew, not the details, but the truth. Why would she, he began. To remind me I cut in that marrying into this family means becoming its property. I stood, closed the laptop. My hands shook, but my voice didn't. I won't live in a world where my value is decided over brunch and balance sheets. He reached for me. Naomi, we can fix this. No, I said, we can't. Because some wars you don't fix. You win. The desert night wrapped around me, dry, still, too quiet to be forgiving. I stood on the roof of my apartment. The town below flickered like a dying lantern, my feet bare against the tar. My chest cracked open to the sky. I could still smell the lemon from his hands, still hear him saying, we can fix this. But some things shouldn't be fixed. They should be burned and rebuilt. I looked up at the stars. They blinked indifferent. Mama used to say, the sky doesn't care if you cry, so do it once, then start building. I did cry. Once. Then I remembered the first time I coded an expense tracker on a borrowed library laptop. The keys stuck. The spacebar skipped. Still, I got it to work. Saved my neighbor from losing her trailer, 26 cents at a time. I remembered the first investor who told me maybe let someone else be the face of your company. I smiled and said thank you, then added a login wall to my demo so no one could steal it again. And now Cynthia, the last test, the last line. She thought she'd erased me from the system, but I don't operate in systems. I build them. I picked up the ring from the windowsill. It felt colder than metal should. I left it on the counter. No note, no goodbye. Only a whisper, not to Callum, not to Cynthia, but to myself. They don't get to write the ending. I do. I moved into a studio above a pawn shop. No kitchen, just a microwave and a cracked mini fridge. The floor creaked every time I turned in bed, but it was mine. And more important, it was quiet enough to build. I named the company Cynthia. Not after anyone, not for beauty. Just a name that didn't come from them. First thing, I built a version of the app that worked offline. For the people who couldn't afford data. For shift workers, moms, students, and motels. Then came the pilot. 3 single moms from the diner circuit. 1 laid off, 2 hustling between jobs. They logged every dollar, every cent. In 3 months, they saved over $900 combined. Not magic, just clarity. I pitched every local fund, every underdog VC. Most said no, too niche, too unpredictable. One called it a passion project with no scale. I smiled, said thank you, wrote their name on my do not reply list. Then came a message, encrypted, from a fund in Denver, run by women, first-generation founders. One had been a waitress. We signed the term sheet in a motel hallway, next to an ice machine that coughed every 10 seconds. 2.8 million Series A. I hired Luna, co-OO, no experience. But she knew people, knew pain, knew how to say we see you in 3 languages and 2 accents. Cynthia exploded in all the places banks ignored. Farm towns, border counties, trailer parks, barbershops. We didn't sell budgeting, we sold dignity. Then one afternoon, Luna ran into my office, her cheeks flushed, phone shaking. Guess who just acquired Western Gulf Bank? I blinked. That sleepy trust fund dinosaur in Connecticut. She turned the screen, headline bold and loud. Whitmore Bank acquires Western Gulf. Expansion begins Q4. I laughed, not bitter, not scared, because I knew something Cynthia didn't. She just bought a liability, a leaking ship, and I'd already circled the sharks. I called Amira. She ran a fund out of Austin. Quiet, relentless. Time to make our move, I said. She didn't ask details, just asked, how fast do you want it? Before they smell blood. We created a proxy shell, not illegal, not unethical, just invisible enough to keep Cynthia sleeping. Through it, we bought, slowly, deliberately, stake by stake. From board cousins, angry ex-board members, widowed shareholders who thought the Whitmores forgot their names. Every signature came with a whisper. Don't tell them who owns it now. Then we waited. Let Cynthia boast. Let her think the bank was growing. To sweeten the trap, I leaked a rumor. A tweet, anonymous, a whisper into the void. Biggest name in fintech meeting with Whitmore this quarter. M&A or media bait. The finance blogs ran with it. Podcasts speculated. Even Callum texted. Is it true I didn't answer? Because the lie worked better than any truth. They started reaching out. A junior exec from Whitmore messaged Luna. Asked if we were open to synergies. She replied with one word, always. That same week I flew to Minneapolis. Not for press, not for pitching, but to sign the final document. The 51% majority control. Cynthia didn't even see it coming because she was too busy fighting the media storm I'd created. Meanwhile, my lawyers sent the invitation. Formal, gold-trimmed, hand-delivered. Annual Whitmore Shareholder Assembly Chair, Naomi Rivas. I heard she threw a wine glass. I would have paid to see it. The night before the vote, I stood in front of my mirror. Same black suit I wore to every meeting. No jewelry, no makeup. Just the quiet. I thought about walking into that boardroom, into that marble tomb she called a legacy. But this time I wouldn't shrink. I wouldn't smile to be accepted. I would walk in and take my seat. Because the table was mine now. They didn't invite me, so I built the door and bought the building. The elevator groaned as it climbed. My palms were damp, not from fear, from memory. 20 floors up, the Whitmore headquarters gleamed like something untouchable. Marble floors, oil portraits, polished glass that reflected power. But today, I was the reflection. The receptionist stared. She'd seen my name on the schedule, but she didn't expect me. This way, she said, voice brittle. I walked through hallways colder than the desert at 3 a.m. Every step echoed. They'd built this place to intimidate, but it couldn't shrink me anymore. The doors opened to the East Wing boardroom. Long mahogany table, 12 chairs, 12 people. And at the far end, Cynthia Whitmore. Hair pulled tight, smile tighter. She turned, saw me, paused for half a breath, then spoke as if reading from a script. You're early, Miss Rivas. The public presentation isn't until next quarter. I walked to the seat at the head, unbuttoned my blazer, sat down. This isn't a presentation. I laid the shareholder documents in front of me. It's a vote. Gasps, coughs. Someone's pen dropped. A chair scraped. Cynthia didn't move. What is this? Her voice barely cracked. Majority acquisition, filed 2 days ago, registered yesterday, effective now. I slid her the envelope. You're welcome to read it, or I can summarize. You're no longer in control. Dinged. Outrageous, someone muttered. Another board member, silver-haired and sharp-suited, leaned in. This is real, he whispered. I checked the transfer log. It's airtight. Cynthia rose, slow, deliberate, like a queen before war. You think money gives you history, she said. You think buying a few shares makes you a Whitmore. I'm not trying to be a Whitmore. I kept my voice level. I'm trying to unmake one. She slammed a file on the table. Tab marked Rivas N. Crisp pages, background checks, old tax forms. A mugshot from my father. Shall we talk about your history, she hissed. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, Is that her father? I took a deep breath, let it settle. Then I pulled out my own folder, slid it to the center. Let's talk about yours. Inside bank transfers, backroom loans, offshore accounts. The deal with Western Gulf. Every move she'd made to keep this bank alive, while pretending it thrived. Pros, you forged stability, I said, but only for those already safe. A younger member scanned the sheets. He paled. This is enough to trigger a regulatory audit. Cynthia's mask cracked. Just for a second, just long enough. This is slander, she spat. I pointed at the projector. Behind me, Luna clicked play. A recording. Cynthia on the phone. We'll bury that app. Rivas won't get within a mile of our name. Gasps rippled again. One man stood. I moved to suspend Ms. Whitmore pending investigation. Another seconded. Voices overlapped. Cynthia turned to me, eyes bright with venom. You were nothing. I stood. I was invisible. You made sure of it. Oh. Then, a voice. I vote in favor of Naomi. Callum. He stood near the back wall, hair longer, suit wrinkled, eyes calm. He stepped forward, placed a thumb drive on the table. I found this in the Western Gulf archive. Hidden contracts, side deals. It backs up everything she said. Cynthia blinked. You traitor. No, his voice broke. I'm your son, but I'm also a man, and I won't protect corruption just because it wears our name. He looked at me. I should have spoken up sooner. I didn't speak, but I nodded, just once. The vote passed, unanimous. Cynthia stood, still straight, still proud, but smaller, somehow smaller. She turned to the board, then to me. This isn't the end. No, I said, it's just no longer yours. Cynthia car. Outside, the wind carried spring dust through the city. I walked past portraits of men in oil and suits, past marble and velvet. Callum caught up beside me. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I'm not giving it, I replied, but I'm not carrying it either. He stopped at the curb. You were always bigger than us. I smiled. No, I just stopped trying to fit inside you. It's on. The town car pulled up. I opened the door, paused. Callum stood in the reflection of the building, not lost, not found, just there. Goodbye, Naomi, he said. I got in, didn't look back. As the city blurred behind the glass, I exhaled. For the first time, without weight. I didn't need them to lose anymore, because I had already won. 3 months later, I stood in front of an empty field in Taos. Red clay, hard wind, one crooked sign. Future site, the Rivas Financial Empowerment Center. Luna read it aloud like a spell. Her voice cracked. I felt the weight in my chest shift. Not heavy, just real. A group of teenage girls stood nearby, hands stained with ink. They'd been helping design the community mural. One asked, "Is it true you used to work at a diner?" I smiled. Not just worked, owned the coffee pot by name. They laughed. Then one said, "I want to build something too, something no one can take from me." I knelt beside her, took her hand. Then never wait for permission. And don't let pedigree talk louder than purpose. She nodded like it mattered, and I think it did. That night I sat alone on the back steps of the diner. The neon flickered above me. Cicadas hummed in the dark. I opened my inbox. One message stood out. From a woman in rural Alaska. I used your app to leave a man who controlled every dollar. I'm free now, and I'm scared. But I'm starting over. Thank you. I pressed my palm to my chest, felt the beat steady. Legacy isn't a name, it's the echo of what you give away. I never did hear from Cynthia again. Last I heard, she moved to Europe, wrote a memoir, called it Surviving Disruption. I didn't buy it, didn't need to, because the only story that mattered was this one. Ours, mine, yours. Where in the world are you listening from? Drop your country, your city, or your dream. I read everyone. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, share it forward. You never know who needs to hear it next.